Sarah Mitchell stood at the entrance of Silver Wings Private Airport, her designer briefcase held confidently in one hand and her phone in the other. At 35, she had become one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in Seattle, but today's incident would remind her that success didn't shield anyone from prejudice. The morning sun reflected off the gleaming windows of the private terminal as Sarah checked her watch. 8:45 a.m., exactly 1 hour before her scheduled flight to San Francisco for a major investment meeting. Her company, Data Secure Solutions, was on the verge of closing a $50 million deal, and she had chosen to fly private to ensure she would arrive fresh and prepared. Sarah's dark blazer and pencil skirt were perfectly pressed, her natural hair styled in elegant twists, and her minimal makeup enhanced her features professionally. Every detail of her appearance had been carefully chosen to reflect her position as CEO of a rising tech company. After 15 years of building her business from scratch, she had learned the importance of presenting herself impeccably. As she approached the terminal's glass doors, Sarah noticed her reflection and straightened her shoulders. Growing up in a middle-class family in Detroit, her parents had always taught her to hold her head high and let her work speak for itself. Their words echoed in her mind. Excellence is your best answer to ignorance. The private terminal was quiet, with only a few other passengers scattered around the exclusive waiting area. The space was designed to provide luxury and comfort, with plush leather chairs, marble floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runway where several private jets stood waiting. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the complimentary beverage station. Taking out her premium membership card for the private aviation service, Sarah smiled slightly, remembering how her first business mentor, an older black woman named Dorothy Wilson, had encouraged her to take up space unapologetically in predominantly white business spaces. Dorothy's words had given her strength throughout her career, especially in moments when others questioned her presence. As she walked toward the security checkpoint, Sarah noticed a few things simultaneously. First, there was a new security guard she hadn't seen before, a middle-aged white man with a stern expression and perfectly pressed uniform. Second, the other passengers, mostly older white men in business suits, were being waved through with casual nods and minimal checking of credentials. Sarah opened her designer bag, reaching for her ID and boarding documents. Her fingers brushed against the USB drive containing her presentation for the investors. Months of work condensed into 40 perfect slides. The familiar touch of the drive reminded her of why she was here and what she'd have achieved. The morning light streaming through the windows created long shadows across the terminal floor. Sarah could hear the distant sound of jet engines and the quiet murmur of conversations around her. The air conditioning hummed softly, keeping the space at a perfect temperature despite the warm summer morning outside. A young flight attendant smiled warmly at Sarah as she walked past, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Sarah returned the smile, appreciating the normal, respectful interaction. In her peripheral vision, she could see the security guard watching her approach, his posture stiffening with each step she took toward his station. Sarah took a deep breath, her hand tightening slightly around her briefcase handle. Years of experience had taught her to read runes and people quickly. It was a skill that had served her well in business negotiations. Right now, that same instinct was telling her something was about to go wrong. The electronic display board above the security checkpoint showed her flight number. PG 285 to San Francisco, status, on time. Sarah had chosen this particular private aviation service for its reputation for professionalism and efficiency. In the 3 years she'd been flying with them, she'd never experienced any issues. As she stepped up to the security checkpoint, Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, meeting the guard's gaze directly. She held out her documents, already anticipating what was about to unfold. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, unaware that it was about to witness an incident that would spark a national conversation about racism in private aviation. The security guard's name tag read James Cooper, and his expression hardened as Sarah approached. Little did either of them know that the next few minutes would be captured on camera, shared thousands of times across social media, and become a catalyst for change in an industry long overdue for reform. James Cooper had been working at Silver Wings Private Airport for just 3 weeks, and he already had strong opinions about who belonged there. As Sarah Mitchell stood before him, presenting her perfectly valid credentials, his face twisted into a look of barely concealed suspicion. I'll need to see additional identification, Cooper said, his voice carrying across the quiet terminal. He held Sarah's premium membership card and pilot-approved boarding pass as if they were suspicious documents, turning them over repeatedly in his hands. Behind Sarah, two white businessmen walked through the checkpoint with nothing more than a casual wave from Cooper's colleague. Sarah maintained her composure, though she felt her heart rate increasing. She'd faced similar situations before, but it never got easier. With steady hands, she opened her briefcase and removed her passport, driver's license, and company ID badge. Each document clearly showed her name, face, and credentials. I have a flight scheduled for 9:45, Sarah said calmly, her voice level and professional. All my documentation is in order. She gestured to the boarding pass Cooper was still holding, which clearly displayed her flight number and seat assignment. Cooper's eyes narrowed as he looked between the documents and Sarah's face. And how exactly did you book this private flight? He asked, emphasizing the word private in a way that made his meaning clear. A few nearby passengers began to turn their heads, attention drawn by his tone. I'm a platinum member of this aviation service, Sarah replied, pointing to the membership card he held. I've been flying with them for 3 years. She could feel her phone buzzing in her pocket, likely messages about the upcoming investor meeting, but she didn't dare reach for it now. Two more passengers walked past during this exchange. One, a white woman in tennis clothes, was cleared through with just a glance at her boarding pass. The other, an elderly white man with golf clubs, received a friendly "Good morning, sir," from Cooper as he passed. Wait right here, Cooper commanded, stepping away from his post with Sarah's documents still in his hands. I need to verify these with my supervisor. He walked toward a door marked "Staff Only," leaving Sarah standing at the checkpoint, unable to proceed without her identification. The morning sun now felt uncomfortably warm on Sarah's back as she stood waiting. She could hear whispers from other passengers, some expressing concern, others simply watching. A young woman in the corner had taken out her phone and appeared to be recording the situation. Maria Rodriguez, a first-time private jet passenger waiting for her own flight, couldn't believe what she was watching. She had recognized Sarah Mitchell immediately. After all, Data Secure Solutions was famous for its groundbreaking cybersecurity work. Maria continued recording, her hands shaking slightly with anger at what she was witnessing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Cooper had disappeared into the staff room, leaving Sarah standing at the checkpoint like a criminal under investigation. The flight crew for her plane had begun to arrive, gathering near the gate and checking their watches with concerned expressions. Sarah glanced at her own watch. It was now 9:10 a.m. Her flight was scheduled to leave in 35 minutes, and she still hadn't cleared security. The $50 million deal waiting in San Francisco seemed to hang in the balance as precious minutes ticked by. Finally, Cooper emerged from the staff room, still holding Sarah's documents. But instead of returning them, he began a new line of questioning. Your company ID says you're the CEO of Data Secure Solutions, he said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe it. Can you prove that? A few gasps could be heard from the growing crowd of observers. Maria Rodriguez's phone was still recording, capturing every word of this increasingly outrageous interaction. The young flight attendant who had smiled at Sarah earlier was now speaking urgently into her radio, presumably contacting the pilots or terminal management. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of emotions: frustration, anger, humiliation. But her voice remained steady as she replied, Sir, every document I provided confirms my identity and my right to be here. I have an important meeting in San Francisco, and my flight leaves in 35 minutes. Cooper's response would soon become infamous across social media. Well, maybe you should have thought about that before trying to access a private terminal where you don't belong. He emphasized the word belong with unmistakable meaning, unaware that his words were being recorded and would soon spark a nationwide controversy. The tension in the private terminal grew thicker as more passengers gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold. Sarah Mitchell remained standing at the security checkpoint, her documents still held hostage by James Cooper, while several white passengers continued to stream past without any scrutiny. A middle-aged businessman in an expensive suit walked up to the checkpoint, his leather briefcase swinging casually. Cooper immediately turned to him with a friendly smile. Good morning, sir. Just a quick look at your boarding pass, please. The contrast in treatment was so obvious that several onlookers shook their heads in disbelief. "This is ridiculous," mumbled one elderly white woman to her husband. "I've seen Ms. Mitchell here at least a dozen times before." The woman's words carried across the quiet terminal, but Cooper acted as if he hadn't heard them. Maria Rodriguez's phone continued recording as she moved closer to capture the entire scene. Her hands trembled with anger, but she kept the camera steady. The video counter now showed over 15 minutes of continuous footage. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice remaining professional despite the situation, "I have an important investor meeting in San Francisco. My flight leaves in less than 30 minutes now." She gestured toward the large terminal windows where her chartered jet was clearly visible on the tarmac. Cooper's response dripped with condescension. "Well, if you're really who you claim to be, I'm sure you can afford to book another flight." He shuffled through her documents again, making a show of examining each one with exaggerated suspicion. The young flight attendant who had been radioing for help earlier now approached the security desk. "Excuse me," she said firmly, "but Ms. Mitchell is one of our regular passengers. I can personally vouch for her identity." Cooper turned to the flight attendant with a stern look. "Stay out of this, miss. Security protocols are my responsibility." His dismissive tone made several observers gasp audibly. By now, the terminal had grown unusually quiet. The complimentary coffee station stood abandoned as everyone focused on the unfolding drama. Even the cleaning staff had stopped their work to watch, their expressions a mixture of concern and anger. Sarah's phone buzzed again in her pocket, likely her team in San Francisco wondering about her status. But she didn't dare reach for it, knowing Cooper might use any sudden movement as an excuse for further delay or escalation. "Look at her membership card," someone called from the crowd. "It's platinum level. Do you know how many flights it takes to earn that status?" Others murmured in agreement, a collective disapproval growing louder. Cooper's face reddened slightly, but he doubled down. "I'm just doing my job. We have to be extra careful about security these days." He emphasized the word security while staring directly at Sarah, the implication clear to everyone watching. A white passenger who had breezed through security minutes earlier stepped back through the checkpoint. "This is shameful," he announced loudly. "I didn't show you half the documentation this lady has provided. What exactly is the difference here?" Maria Rodriguez, still recording, called out. We all know the difference he's seeing. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Several phones were now raised, capturing the incident from different angles. Sarah stood her ground, her posture straight and dignified despite the humiliation being forced upon her. She built a tech empire from nothing, shattered countless glass ceilings, but here she was, being treated like an intruder because of her skin color. The flight crew for Sarah's plane had gathered in full now, speaking urgently among themselves. The pilot, a tall man with captain's stripes on his shoulders, was making his way toward the security checkpoint with purpose in his stride. "How many more forms of ID do you need?" Sarah asked calmly, though her patience was wearing thin. "I provided government-issued identification, company credentials, and valid travel documents. Other passengers have cleared security with far less." Cooper's response echoed through the now silent terminal. "Maybe you got these documents through some kind of program. We need to be absolutely certain they're legitimate." The collective intake of breath from the onlookers was audible. Maria Rodriguez's hand flew to her mouth in shock, though she kept her phone steady and recording. This blatant display of racism was being captured in its entirety, soon to become evidence that would spark widespread outrage across the nation. The terminal's atmosphere crackled with tension as the pilot finally reached the security desk, his face set in a grim expression that suggested this situation was about to take a dramatic turn. Captain David Anderson, a 20-year veteran pilot, reached the security checkpoint with thunderous disapproval written across his face. Standing at 6 feet tall in his crisp uniform, he commanded immediate attention as he addressed Cooper. "What seems to be the problem here?" the captain asked, though the growing crowd of witnesses had made the situation painfully clear. "Ms. Mitchell is one of our most valued passengers. I've personally flown her to dozens of business meetings." Cooper shifted uncomfortably, but maintained his stance. "I'm following security protocols, sir. These documents need extra verification." He clutched Sarah's identification papers as if they were evidence in a criminal investigation. Maria Rodriguez's video had now been recording for over 20 minutes. She had started a live stream on social media, and comments of outrage were pouring in by the second. The number of viewers jumped from hundreds to thousands as people shared the feed across multiple platforms. Extra verification? Captain Anderson's voice carried clear authority. "I've been watching for the past 5 minutes. You've let 6 other passengers through with barely a glance at their documents." He turned to Sarah with a respectful nod. "Ms. Mitchell, I'd apologize for this inexcusable treatment." The terminal had become so quiet that the distant sound of jet engines seemed unusually loud. Other flight crew members gathered behind their captain, their faces showing a mixture of embarrassment and anger at how their passenger was being treated. Sarah maintained her dignified composure, though her meeting time was now seriously threatened. "Thank you, Captain Anderson," she said, her voice steady. "I appreciate your intervention, but I'm more concerned about making our departure time." A senior flight attendant named Jennifer stepped forward, her phone in hand. "I've already contacted terminal management, and they're on their way. This is completely unacceptable." She turned to Cooper with fierce disapproval. "We have a responsibility to treat all our passengers with respect." Cooper's face had turned a deep shade of red, but he still refused to back down. "I'm the security officer on duty, and I say these documents need further verification." His hands were shaking slightly as he continued to hold Sarah's identification. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "I've seen enough." An elderly white woman in expensive clothing stepped forward from the crowd. "I'm Barbara Whitman, a board member of this aviation company, and I was trying to mind my own business, but this has gone too far." Mrs. Whitman's presence caused an immediate stir. She was well known in private aviation circles, and her authority was unquestionable. She turned to Sarah with genuine remorse in her eyes. "Ms. Mitchell, on behalf of our company, I am deeply sorry for this discriminatory treatment." Maria's live stream caught every word as Mrs. Whitman continued, now addressing Cooper directly. "Young man, you violated every principle of our company's service standards. This is blatant discrimination, and it's being broadcast live to thousands of people." Cooper finally looked at the phones recording him, and the color drained from his face. He glanced down at Sarah's documents, then at the growing crowd of angry observers, seeming to realize for the first time the gravity of his actions. Terminal management arrived at that moment, 2 senior officials in suits who had clearly been running. They took in the scene, the angry crowd, the recording phones, the frustrated pilot, the board member, and Sarah Mitchell still standing calmly despite the humiliation she'd endured. "Return Ms. Mitchell's documents immediately," ordered the lead manager, his voice leaving no room for argument. Cooper hesitated for a moment before slowly placing the documents on the counter, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Sarah collected her identification with steady hands, although the meeting time in San Francisco now loomed impossibly close. She checked her phone quickly, dozens of missed calls and messages from her team and the investors. Captain Anderson stepped forward again. "Miss Mitchell, if you'll follow me, we'll expedite your boarding. I've already radioed ahead for priority clearance from air traffic control. We'll do our best to make up the lost time in the air." As Sarah finally moved past the security checkpoint, the crowd of witnesses broke into spontaneous applause. Maria Rodriguez ended her live stream, which had now reached over 50,000 viewers and was being shared rapidly across multiple social media platforms. The terminal manager turned to Cooper with a stern expression. "Mr. Cooper, please surrender your security badge and follow me to the office." The morning sun streaming through the terminal windows illuminated the shame on Cooper's face as he unpinned his badge, his actions having initiated a sequence of events that would soon spark a national conversation about racial bias in private aviation. The next 30 minutes unfolded in a blur of activity at Silver Wing's private airport. While Sarah Mitchell was finally escorted to her aircraft, the terminal buzzed with urgent conversations and phone calls. The video of the incident was spreading across social media platforms like wildfire, with the hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack trending within minutes. Maria Rodriguez's live stream had ended, but its impact was just beginning. Major news networks were already calling the airport's press office, and clips from her video were being shared by celebrities and civil rights activists across the country. The raw footage showed everything, from Cooper's undisguised prejudice to Sarah's dignified response. In the cockpit, Captain Anderson worked quickly with air traffic control. Tower, this is PJ 285 requesting priority clearance. We've had a ground delay due to a security incident. His voice was professional, but his jaw remained tight with controlled anger over what he witnessed. Sarah sat in the luxury cabin, finally able to check her messages. Her fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen as she typed. Slight delay due to discriminatory incident at airport. Will explain in person. ETA approximately 30 minutes behind schedule. Please hold the meeting. The response from her San Francisco team came immediately. We've seen the video. It's everywhere. The investors are happy to wait. They're more concerned about what happened to you. Take your time. Back in the terminal, Barbara Whitman was on her phone with the aviation company's CEO. Jonathan, this is a crisis. I just witnessed the most appalling display of racism from one of our security contractors. Yes, it's already viral. We need an emergency board meeting and an immediate public response. Cooper had been escorted to a private office where two human resources representatives were already waiting. His security badge lay on the desk between them, and his face had taken on the ashen look of someone watching their career crumble in real time. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? The senior HR representative asked, sliding a tablet across the desk showing the growing social media storm. Ms. Mitchell is not only a respected business leader but one of our most valuable clients. Outside the office, Jennifer, the senior flight attendant, was giving her statement to terminal management. This isn't the first time we've heard complaints about Mr. Cooper, she revealed. Several passengers of color have mentioned feeling uncomfortable around him, but nothing this blatant until today. Maria Rodriguez found herself surrounded by fellow passengers, all wanting to share their own recordings and contact information in case formal statements were needed. I couldn't just stand there and watch it happen, she explained to a sympathetic crowd. Someone had to document this. The elderly couple who had spoken up earlier approached the terminal manager. We've been flying private for 30 years, the woman said firmly. If this is how your security treats distinguished passengers like Ms. Mitchell, perhaps we should reconsider our membership. Meanwhile, Sarah's plane had finally taken off. As they climbed through the morning sky, Captain Anderson's voice came over the intercom. Ms. Mitchell, on behalf of our entire crew, I want to personally apologize again for this morning's incident. We've been cleared for a direct route to San Francisco and should make up most of the lost time. Sarah looked out the window at the shrinking airport below, her mind already shifting to the upcoming investor meeting. Yet she couldn't help but think about all the other people of color who faced similar discrimination without cameras recording, without board members stepping in, without their stories going viral. Her phone buzzed with a message from Dorothy Wilson, her old mentor. Saw the video, Sarah. You handled it with grace, as always. But grace shouldn't have to be our armor. Use this moment. Make them change. In the terminal's executive office, the management team was drafting an urgent press release. Words like unacceptable, immediate action, and zero tolerance filled the screen. They knew that in the age of social media, they had minutes, not hours, to respond to this crisis. The morning sun had risen fully now, its light filling the terminal where just an hour ago, bias and discrimination had been on full display. But unlike countless similar incidents that had gone unrecorded and unaddressed, this one had been captured, shared, and was now demanding action. The aviation industry's long overdue reckoning with racial bias had begun, sparked by one guard's prejudice and one woman's dignity in the face of discrimination. By noon, the video of Sarah Mitchell's ordeal had exploded across every major social media platform. Maria Rodriguez's original livestream had been viewed over 2 million times, with celebrities, civil rights leaders, and business executives all sharing and commenting on the incident. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack had become the top trending topic nationwide. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination in aviation, creating a virtual tidal wave of similar experiences that had gone unreported or ignored for years. In San Francisco, Sarah's investors had postponed the meeting until her arrival, but not out of inconvenience. The CEO of the investment firm, Richard Chen, had watched the viral video and immediately called an emergency staff meeting. Ms. Mitchell showed incredible poise and professionalism in the face of blatant discrimination, Chen told his team. Those are exactly the leadership qualities we look for in our partnerships. When she arrives, We're not just discussing a $50 million deal, we're discussing how we can support our company's growth on a much larger scale. Meanwhile, Silver Wing's private airport was facing a public relations nightmare. Their initial press release, rushed out within the first hour, was being criticized as too vague and non-committal. Major news networks had set up their vans outside the terminal, waiting for official statements and trying to interview departing passengers. Barbara Wickman, the board member who had intervened, was now leading an emergency virtual board meeting. "This isn't just about one security guard," she insisted, her voice firm over the video conference. "This is about systemic issues in private aviation that we've ignored for too long." Social media continued to churn with activity. A prominent Black Business Leaders Association released a statement. "What happened to Sarah Mitchell today happens to countless professionals of color every day. The only difference is that this time it was caught on camera." James Cooper had been officially terminated, but the story was far from over. Civil rights organizations were calling for a complete audit of Silver Wing's security practices. The company's stock price had dropped significantly as investors worried about potential boycotts and legal action. In the air, Sarah's phone was filling with messages of support from across the business world. CEOs she'd never met were reaching out to share their own experiences and offer their solidarity. Major airlines began posting their own statements about diversity and inclusion, sensing the industry-wide implications of the incident. Mary Rodriguez was being hailed as a hero on social media for documenting the incident. News outlets were requesting interviews, but she declined them all, insisting that the focus should remain on the larger issue of discrimination in aviation. "I just did what anyone should do when they witness injustice," she wrote in her only public statement. "The real story here is how many times this happens without someone recording it." The terminal employees who had witnessed the incident were also speaking out. Jennifer, the senior flight attendant, gave a powerful interview to a local news station. "We see subtle discrimination all the time, but most people stay quiet to keep their jobs. Today showed us why we can't be silent anymore." By mid-afternoon, Silver Wings announced comprehensive changes to their security protocols. They committed to mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, regular audits of security interactions, and the creation of a passenger advocacy board to address discrimination complaints. The company's CEO finally appeared on national television, looking appropriately grave. "What happened this morning was a complete violation of our values and standards. We're not just promising change, we're making immediate, concrete changes to ensure this never happens again." Civil rights attorneys were already reaching out to Sarah's team, suggesting class action lawsuits on behalf of other passengers who had faced similar discrimination. The incident was quickly becoming a catalyst for industry-wide examination of how private aviation treated passengers of color. Dorothy Wilson, Sarah's mentor, appeared on a business news network to discuss the broader implications. "Sarah Mitchell is a CEO who can afford to fly private. Think about all the travelers of color who face this kind of treatment in regular airports, with no cameras rolling and no board members to intervene." As the story continued to dominate news cycles, it became clear that this was more than just a viral video or a single incident of discrimination. It was becoming a moment of reckoning for an industry that had long avoided serious scrutiny of its practices regarding race and equality. The afternoon sun glinted off the news van's satellite dishes outside Silver Wings Airport, as reporters prepared for their evening broadcasts. What had started as one woman's humiliating experience was transforming into a movement for change in private aviation. 1 week after the incident, Sarah Mitchell sat in her Seattle office, reviewing the sweeping changes her experience had sparked across the private aviation industry. Her dual computer monitors displayed dozens of emails from industry leaders, civil rights organizations, and fellow business executives, all seeking her input on new diversity initiatives. The $50 million investment deal in San Francisco had turned into something much bigger. Richard Chen's firm had not only approved the original investment, but had increased it to $150 million, specifically citing Sarah's leadership qualities during the airport incident as a key factor in their decision. "Your composure under pressure proved what we already knew about your leadership capabilities," Chen's email read. "We're not just investing in data-secure solutions. We're investing in you and your vision for change." Silver Wing's private airport had undergone a complete transformation. The entire security staff had been replaced with a new team that had undergone extensive anti-bias training. Barbara Whitman had been appointed head of the newly created Diversity and Inclusion Board with a substantial budget and real power to implement changes. Maria Rodriguez's video had now been viewed over 20 million times. She had finally agreed to one interview, choosing a respected morning show to share her perspective. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't started recording. How many other incidents have gone undocumented? How many voices have gone unheard? The former security guard, James Cooper, had issued a public apology through his attorney. I now understand the harm my actions caused, the statement read. My behavior reflected deep-seated biases I hadn't confronted in myself. I'm committed to learning and changing. The apology received mixed responses on social media, with many questioning its sincerity. Sarah's mentor, Dorothy Wilson, had helped her establish the Mitchell Initiative for Aviation Equality, a nonprofit organization dedicated to documenting and addressing discrimination in air travel. Major airlines and private aviation companies had pledged millions in funding, eager to demonstrate their commitment to change. We're not just focusing on private aviation, Sarah explained in a press conference announcing the initiative. This is about every traveler who has ever felt profiled, questioned, or humiliated because of their race. Their stories matter, and we're going to make sure they're heard. The terminal manager who had witnessed the incident had been promoted to head of customer experience, with a specific mandate to rebuild trust with passengers of color. Under his leadership, the airport had implemented a new reporting system for discrimination complaints, with each case receiving thorough investigation and follow-up. Jennifer, the senior flight attendant who had supported Sarah, was now leading training sessions for flight crews across the country. We're teaching people to be active allies, she explained in a training video that had gone viral itself. It's not enough to feel bad about discrimination. We have to act when we see it. Captain Anderson had written a powerful op-ed for a major newspaper describing his years of witnessing subtle discrimination in aviation. What happened to Ms. Mitchell was not an isolated incident, he wrote. It was simply the first time we couldn't look away. The incident had sparked a broader conversation about privilege and access in private aviation. Several companies had begun reviewing their membership policies, looking for hidden biases that might have created barriers for passengers of color. Sarah's company, DataSecure Solutions, had received an unexpected benefit from the incident. Companies impressed by her handling of the situation had reached out for both business partnerships and cybersecurity services. Her team had doubled in size to handle the increased demand. Back in her office, Sarah reviewed the draft of a book she'd been asked to write about leadership and resilience in the face of discrimination. The working title read, Flying Through Barriers. Transform discrimination into change. The morning sun streamed through her office windows as she read an email from a young black girl who wanted to become a pilot. After seeing how you handled that situation, I know I can handle anything that comes my way in aviation. Thank you for showing us how to stand tall. A notification popped up on Sarah's calendar. She had a board meeting for the Mitchell Initiative in an hour. Representatives from major airlines would be there, ready to discuss industry-wide changes in training, security protocols, and complaint handling. Sarah looked at the framed news article on her wall describing the incident. What had begun as a humiliating experience had transformed into a powerful movement for change. As she gathered her materials for the board meeting, she smiled, knowing that the next generation of travelers would face fewer barriers because someone had finally said, enough. 1 year after the incident at Silver Wings Private Airport, Sarah Mitchell stood at a podium in front of a packed auditorium at the National Aviation Conference. The audience included airline executives, security personnel, civil rights leaders, and most importantly, everyday travelers who had experienced similar discrimination. Change doesn't happen in a moment. Sarah began her keynote speech. It happens in the thousands of moments that follow when we choose to do things differently. The crowd listened intently as she outlined the transformations that had occurred in the aviation industry over the past year. The Mitchell Initiative for Aviation Equality had documented over 5,000 cases of discrimination in air travel, creating the first comprehensive database of its kind. This data had led to policy changes at more than 50 airports nationwide, with many more actively implementing new procedures. Maria Rodriguez sat in the front row, now serving as the initiative's Director of Public Documentation. Her decision to record the incident had inspired a nationwide network of witnesses who now documented and reported similar situations. "We call them aviation equality observers," Sarah explained, acknowledging Maria with a warm smile. Barbara Whitman, who had intervened that day, had expanded her role beyond Silver Wings. She now led an industry-wide coalition of board members committed to diversity and inclusion in private aviation. Under her leadership, membership demographics have begun to shift, with a 40% increase in executives of color using private aviation services. Captain Anderson had been promoted to Director of Flight Operations, where he implemented new training programs for flight crews. "Our staff doesn't just fly planes anymore," he often said. "They're ambassadors for equality in the skies." His programs have been adopted by major airlines and private aviation companies across the country. Data Secure Solutions, Sarah's technology company, had grown exponentially. The $150 million investment had been used to develop new security screening software that helped eliminate bias in passenger verification processes. The system was now being tested at major airports worldwide. Jennifer, the flight attendant who had supported Sarah, had risen to become Vice President of Customer Experience at Silver Wings. Under her leadership, passenger satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, particularly among travelers of color. "Dignity isn't a luxury," became her department's motto. The former terminal manager had implemented his innovative reporting system at airports nationwide. Every complaint was now tracked, investigated, and resolved with transparency. The data collected had become invaluable in identifying patterns and preventing future incidents. Sarah's book, Flying Through Barriers, had become a bestseller and was now required reading in aviation training programs. Its message of transforming discrimination into positive change had resonated far beyond the aviation industry, inspiring similar initiatives in hotels, restaurants, and other service industries. The young black girl who had written to Sarah about becoming a pilot was now enrolled in flight school, supported by a scholarship from the Mitchell Initiative. She wasn't alone. The initiative had funded aviation education for dozens of students from underrepresented communities. As Sarah concluded her speech, she shared a powerful statistic. Reported incidents of discrimination in private aviation had decreased by 65% over the past year. "But our work isn't finished," she reminded the audience. "As long as one traveler faces prejudice in our skies, we have more work to do." The conference hall erupted in standing applause. Among those standing was James Cooper, the former security guard, who had asked to attend after completing extensive anti-bias training. He had become an unexpected advocate for change, speaking to security teams about recognizing and addressing their own biases. Dorothy Wilson, Sarah's mentor, watched proudly from the side of the stage. The movement they had helped create had grown beyond their wildest expectations. Airlines now competed for diversity ratings as fiercely as they did for safety records. After the speech, Sarah checked her phone to find a message from Richard Chen. Data Secure Solutions had just been valued at $1 billion, making her one of the few black women to achieve unicorn status in the tech industry. But more importantly, their security software was making travel safer and more equitable for everyone. As the afternoon sun streamed through the conference center's windows, Sarah looked out at the diverse crowd of aviation professionals networking and sharing stories. What had begun as one woman's humiliating experience had transformed an entire industry's approach to equality and dignity. The skies, finally, were becoming truly friendly for everyone.